There are so many great, exciting, inspiring victories coming from our friends to the South, and our next speaker has been helping to make sure that those things happen. My friend April Sims is the first woman of color and the first Black person to be elected to the executive of the Washington State Labor Council, and as of last month is the president-elect of that organization. Before that, she was a member of the Washington Federation of State Employees, became a shop steward, an officer, and then a staff person, mobilizing members around political campaigns and legislative issues. April knows firsthand the difference that union membership can make. It was her mother's first union job, and I won't tell you about that because I have a feeling she's going to. But I know that her story is familiar to many of you because April has been a dear friend of ours here at the BC Federation of Labor, joining us at the Summer Institute for Union Women and many other things. Whenever we ask April to join us and support us here in BC, April shows up. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to my dear friend, April Sims.
Thank you, Suzanne, for that warm introduction. And good morning, sisters, siblings, and brothers. How y'all doing? It's good to be here. I want to thank President Cronk and Secretary Treasurer Skidmore for inviting me to speak today, and thank you to the leadership of the BC Fed for this opportunity. I want you to know that I don't take the privilege to be invited to speak here today lightly. I'm just going to check in on my... There we go. I even have a PowerPoint. I've been watching the leadership team of President Cronk and Secretary Treasurer Skidmore for the last several years, and watching all the amazing work that you all are doing here in the North. And it's an inspiration to those of us in the South who have been facing some significant challenges, which I will share with you all throughout the course of my speech. But I want to wish you the best of luck in your retirement, President Laird, and thank you for all of your work in the movement. And Secretary Treasurer Skidmore, I am excited about your future and really looking forward to the work that we will continue to do together. So, yeah. So good morning. Again, my name is April Sims. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the privilege of serving as the Secretary Treasurer of the Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO, and as Secretary Treasurer Skidmore mentioned, as of last month, am President-elect, which I'm very excited about. I want to talk a little bit today about my personal journey into leadership in the labor movement, and talk about the good work of our movement, and most importantly, how we grow and build a labor movement that meets the moment across all borders and through all of our institutions. Before I dig into my PowerPoint, I want to lift up a couple of things. The first is you might notice some spelling errors. I want you to know I mean no disrespect. I blame my American education. So words like labor and organization might be misspelled. You might notice, right? Yeah, I apologize. You do. We're doing it wrong. You might notice words that end in ER, I might have transposed them, so center is misspelled. So forgive me in advance, I would appreciate that. Now, as Secretary Treasurer, my fiduciary responsibilities are ensuring the financial health of our organization and ensuring constitutional compliance. So at first glance, I'm not the kind of person you want to invite to a dinner party, right? I can talk constitutional compliance all day long. But when you consider that the budget of an organization is a moral document, and where you spend your money is an identification of your priorities. And when you add to that, that the Constitution of the Washington State Labor Council, our founding document, charges us, and I quote, with fighting the forces that seek to undermine the democratic institutions of our nation and to enslave the human soul. Suddenly, the work of constitutional compliance gets a little more interesting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that work this morning. But first, a little bit about the Washington State Labor Council. No? Okay, we'll go here. We represent over 500,000 working people all across the state, workers in every industry, every sector, and every corner of our beautiful state. We proudly boast having the third highest union density in the nation. In our little corner, right? We're just behind New York and Hawaii, and we've already put them on notice that we're organizing because we're a little competitive. But we're at about twice the national average, nearly 20%, which means 1 in every 5 workers in Washington state is represented by a union. And again, we're organizing and looking forward to bringing those numbers up. Y'all can give it up. I like the energy this morning. This is good, this is good. And some basic information about Washington state. Our population is at about 7.7 million. Again, 1 in 5 workers are union. Did I mention that we have the third highest union? I said that already? Okay, just checking, just checking. The median income in our state is about $81,000. So to give you a little bit of context, the highest median income is in Maryland at about $87,000 a year, and the lowest is in Mississippi, which is in the South, which is at about $46,000 a year. So I mentioned the union density again because I think you can see a direct correlation between a higher median net income and union density. And our density is in part because organized labor has a long history in Washington state. On our building in Seattle, we have a mural that shares some of that history. And I want to give a shout out to my sister and mentor, Lynn Dotson, who was the former Secretary-Treasurer of the Washington State Labor Council, for her work and her vision in making this mural a reality. Our building is located on the unceded and contested land of the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and other Coast Salish people. And for over a century, our building has stood at the intersection of the historic Black and Asian neighborhoods in the city of Seattle. And these are communities that have not always felt their needs represented by our movement. They have historically been left behind. This mural was commissioned as a celebration of the area's history and people and a visual offering to the community. So apart from being beautiful, the mural tells the story of workers in the land we now call Washington, spanning from indigenous farmers before colonization to modern mass movements for justice. And this, coupled with the language in our Constitution, serves as a reminder of the strength of our movement and our obligation to show up for others. I take pride in this charge and in our movement's ability to build power for working people. This pride is professional. It's the work that I've dedicated my life to. I'm sure many of you also feel that same pride in the work of our movement. And this pride is also personal. See, the labor movement changed my life. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that. I was raised by a single mother of 3, and my mom, Cherie, believed in hard work and the American dream. She believed in the idea that if she worked hard and if she played by the rules, she'd have the dignity that comes from making enough money to take care of her family, that she'd be able to pay the bills, put food on the table. And maybe if she planned just right, she'd be able to put up a little something so she could retire one day. But that dream wasn't our reality because we were poor. And we weren't money is tight, wait till next payday poor. They just cut off the electricity poor. We were on and off welfare for most of my childhood, and my mom wasn't lazy. I mean, she worked. I mean, she was one of the hardest working women I knew. Sometimes she'd work 2 or 3 jobs right before school started or before the holidays, when times were especially tight. But hard work was never enough because something would inevitably happen. You know, one of us would get sick and she'd miss work. Like the time we all got the flu and we did the thing that kids do. You know, we didn't get sick all at once, but rather back to back to back. Some of you know what I'm talking about. She missed 6 days of work. She didn't have paid sick leave, and so since she didn't work, she didn't get paid. And since she didn't get paid, she couldn't pay the rent. So for a while, we were homeless and had to go back on welfare. Sometimes she'd quit, you know, because the working conditions were bad. Like the winter, she worked the early shift at the dry cleaners, and the manager refused to turn on the heat because she was the only one working. I used to get up early and watch her prepare for the day, and she'd put on her multiple layers of long johns, she'd fill up her big thermos of coffee and head out the door. And I remember her coming home with fingers still stiff from the cold. I remember her frustration and her desperation that we just couldn't get ahead. for every 2 steps she would take forward, something would push her back. And we were trapped in this cycle of poverty. And then she got a union job, and things changed. And I remember her, you can give it up for that. Yeah. I remember her coming home from her interview, and she said, "Baby, if I can just get this permanent job, it's gonna change our lives." And she was right. Her union negotiated a contract that made sure her hard work was rewarded with a livable wage so she could pay the light bill. Her contract included good benefits like health care and paid sick leave, so she didn't worry about how she was gonna pay the rent when my brother and sister and I all got the chicken pox. Her union gave her a voice. I like the energy over here. Yeah, her union fought for her. When they reclassified her position and her union fought for back pay, she used that money to buy her first car, which meant she didn't have to take the 1.5-hour bus trip from our house all the way out to the hospital where she worked. Her union gave her a voice. When her supervisor was making inappropriate comments, she was afraid to say anything. She didn't want to risk her job. She knew her kids were counting on her. She mentioned it to a coworker who happened to be a union shop steward. And her union shop steward told her, "Cherie, you're not the one who needs to worry about losing your job." And after 30 years of hard work, after 30 years of hard work and commitment, my mom retired with economic dignity and financial stability because of her union pension. And yes, and let me tell y'all, she's living her best life right now. COVID restrictions are lifted, she's traveling everywhere. This is the American dream. So I know, yeah, you can give it up for that. I learned at an early age the difference that the labor movement makes in the lives of workers, families, and communities. It's that knowledge that's driven my service in the labor movement, and that knowledge that drives my vision for the movement that we can create together. So it was only natural that when I got an opportunity to join a union, I did. I signed my union card on my first day. And I usually say that I'm only here because someone invited me to a local meeting. I think that might be true of many of you in this room. Yeah. I share that the shop steward in my work site saw leadership in me long before I saw it in myself, and he kept asking me to go to meetings and go to trainings and get involved and get engaged. But an essential part of my story that I don't often share publicly, but I feel compelled to share today, is that I was a teenage mom and a high school dropout. And it took me a couple of years to go back to school and complete my education. But it took me even longer to shake the shame and the stigma that came from being a high school dropout. So I'm here because my union invested in me. I'm here, right? I'm here because my union supported me, believed in me, and because my union made space for me. And we often talk about the union difference in terms of the economic difference. And that's certainly true. That was my lived experience growing up. But we don't often talk about the difference that we make in the lives of the whole worker. And that's the work that I want to build on as a leader in the labor movement. And I know that my path into leadership was not direct. Right? It's often a long, windy road that gets us where we're supposed to be. But I share my story today because I think that there are parts in my story that might exist in your stories as well. And there is power in sharing our stories in spaces like this, because we're reminded of the difference that we can make when we come together and share our stories and build community. So thank you for allowing me to share that story with you this morning. I want to talk a little bit about the union difference, not only in my lived experience, but it's real. In the United States, on average, union members earn nearly twice as much or accumulate nearly twice as much wealth as non-union workers and non-union families. The median wealth of union families in the States is about $270,000 versus about $120,000 for non-union families. So it's actually more than twice as much. And union membership has been the pathway out of poverty for many. My story is not unique. Dr. Martin Luther King once called the labor movement the principal force for transforming misery and despair into hope and progress. And the stats back that up. Our work together in this movement backs that up. Union membership helps close the racial wealth gap, significantly increasing household wealth of Black, brown, and indigenous families. So we give that up. So it makes sense that in the US, Black workers are unionized at a higher rate than any other race. And so beyond economics, union membership offers workers something desperately missing in our capitalist system: a voice on the job and a way to demand respect from the boss and community connection with other working folks, similar to the connection that we are building at this convention this week. Union membership means empowerment. I mean, there's nothing like knowing that your boss doesn't have absolute power. There's nothing like banding together with your coworkers to fight back and have a voice in the workplace, and that is the value of our movement. I just love this slide. I don't really have much to go with it other than I love this slide, but I also recognize that at our best, organized labor fights for the rights of working people on the jobs and in our communities in tandem. Our work fighting the forces that seek to enslave the human soul is about lifting all workers out of poverty and giving a voice to all workers, both those that belong to a union and those that have yet to have that opportunity. When we fight for a more just world for all working people, spanning borders, we are in this same fight together. For all of the differences our two countries' political systems have, there are some strong commonalities, right? First, we're both up against powerful interests with incredible wealth at their disposal. Second, in Canada and the US alike, we're living in a time of rising fascism and reactionary extremism. And third, and most importantly, despite all of our challenges, workers in Canada and in the US are winning. Despite all of these challenges, we're winning. We're winning at the ballot box, we're winning at the bargaining table, we're winning in our communities. And that is because of the organized effort of all of you in this room and the leaders up here on this stage. Now, I mentioned that I've been tracking the work that you all have been doing in BC for the last few years. Our siblings to the north often provide us with some great examples of what is possible when we work together. So I want to lift up some of the advancements that you all have secured for working people. The 5 days of paid sick leave, that is huge. Most unorganized workers in the States don't have access to paid sick leave. And paid leave for victims of domestic assault and sexual violence, that's also huge. Advancements like the return of card check or single-step certification, we've got our eye on that. And the work you've done around the regulation and licensing of asbestos, all to keep workers and families and communities safer. Now, in the States, federal action is largely stalled by some anti-worker partisanship. You guys have probably been watching, or at least maybe some of you have tracked some of what's been happening in the States over the last couple of years. Yeah. But in Washington State, we have been able to win some similar worker protections following your lead and learning from you all in terms of what's possible, and we're grateful for your leadership. Policies like paid family medical leave and the a state paid leave program that is designed to provide economic security when you're welcoming a child or taking care of a loved one or taking care of your own health. Paid parental leave is still not the standard in the United States, and Washington State is proud to be one of the states leading the nation in this fight. So, when working people bypassed the gridlock in the state legislature in 2016, we secured paid or increased minimum wage and safe and sick leave, ensuring that every worker would earn 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 40 hours they worked, which is about six and a half days a year, whether you are represented by a union or not. And this had the impact for many of our union contracts of taking that piece off the negotiation table and allowing negotiators to use their capital to fight for other benefits for workers all across the state. I want to lift up a couple of those policies because when the COVID pandemic hit in 2019, I think workers in Washington state were better protected than many other parts of our country because we already had paid safe and sick leave. We already had a guaranteed minimum wage that was higher than the national average, and we had paid family medical leave. But despite all of that, we still face some significant challenges in Washington state. And we did count on the federal government to bolster unemployment payments for workers, but the challenge there is it didn't help our undocumented siblings. Undocumented workers in the states don't have access to the social safety net that documented workers in the states have access to, despite the fact that they pay into the system. So in Washington state, we were able to successfully secure funding for unemployment for undocumented workers. Millions of dollars directly into the hands of the workers and the families who needed it most during the crisis. Now, across borders, these advancements are making a real difference in working people's lives. And we achieve these wins through hard work, a little bit of elbow grease, and the power of our movement. And our political activism starts in the streets by electing pro-worker candidates into office. Now, I know here in BC, y'all have worked hard for the NDP government that you now have, and I want to congratulate you for that. For majorities that will fight for the working class, and it's been tough years, yet still you all are advancing policies that impact workers and build power for the working class, and you're pulling out wins. It's a testament to the strategic approach and the well-leveraged strength of the power of the labor movement in BC and to the leadership team you have at the state Fed. Now, in the United States, did I say the state Fed? That's my language, not yours. But you all have to forgive me if I slip in my acronyms. Remember, that's my terrible American education. It's true. So we just finished up the midterms in the state. So quick show of hands, how many of you have been watching the political landscape in the US over the last few years? Great. Now keep your hands up if you have been doing that with a mixture of dismay, sadness, and maybe a little disgust. Yeah? Okay, great. That sounds about right. Honestly, same, right? Same. You all know that extremism has taken hold in one of the only two viable political parties in the United States, and anti-democracy, election-denying candidates ran tight races for key offices in some battleground states. Now, shame. Oh, I like that. Yes, shame, shame. I thought you all were saying same, because that's just my language. Yes, yes. And so you all probably watched in June when our Supreme Court rolled back abortion protections and abortion rights. Shame, shame. And it looked for a minute like power was poised to swing even further away from the working class. Now, midterm elections typically are a bit of a referendum on the current president's policies and his performance, right? Their performance. And usually a highly negative one. Typically, midterm elections that happen 2 years into the president's term are a huge swing in favor of the party that is not in control. So we knew going into these elections that we were likely going to face some losses. We knew it was going to be bad, we just didn't know how bad it was going to be. Our history has told us that midterm elections are historically bad. But that's not what happened this year. We're still processing the elections, both literally and figuratively, but one thing is clear. In state after state, union households, the working class, provided critical votes that put pro-worker candidates over the top. Working people turned out in droves to vote. Now, in the states, union members make up an estimated 11% of the total electorate. And if you factor in households and household voting members, it's about 18%. So the ability to significantly impact the outcome of an election when we mobilize, right? When we get active, when we tap into our collective power. So of these folks that voted, polls tell us that union members voted in favor of pro-worker candidates at a rate of 56%. So much higher than the national average, which tells us that we punch way above our weight, that when we mobilize, when we get active, when they push us too far, we push back. And in Washington state, where union households make up over 19% of the total electorate, not including household families, about 65% of union voters we contacted were supporting Labor's endorsed candidates, up and down the ballot. That is the impact that we have when we mobilize. That is why our endorsement is so important. That's why candidates compete for that endorsement, and that's why we're able to deliver in elections. I also want to lift up that if you all were tracking what happened in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, who won that critical Senate race, he declared victory for the U.S. Senate in a Carhartt hoodie. In a Carhartt hoodie. It's a good time to be part of the working class. It is a good time to be in the labor movement. But I want to say that despite all the fear-mongering about crime, or socialists, or immigrants, or trans folks, or whatever your neighbor might be doing in their own home, most voters rejected extreme right candidates running on hate, division, and lies. And that's because folks want to vote for something good. They don't want to vote against something bad. When we give them the option, when we give them a vision for the future that we can create together, working people choose candidates that share that vision. For a future where working people have not just what they need to survive, but we have the luxury to thrive, the freedom to thrive. I forgot about my PowerPoint, y'all. There we go. Young voters turned out to vote at rates higher than voters over the age of 65 in the US this year. And those young voters, aged 18 to 19, across all racial demographics, supported Democrats and pro-worker candidates overwhelmingly, more than any other age block in our country. That tells us something. That tells us that we're on the cusp of something big. That tells us that this moment was made for our movement, that we are ready for the challenges that we face. Though they may be great, we are prepared and ready to mobilize and to continue to build power and to build on the successes that we have secured over the last decade. Yeah, I like that. So I want to talk a little bit, since we talked a little bit about the government in the US and what you all might be tracking, I imagine that you were also tracking our response to the COVID pandemic. You all smartly and rightfully closed up your borders because you didn't want no part of what was happening in the States. And I got to tell you, I mean, Canada always looks good to me, but y'all were looking real good. You know what I mean? Like, I love my country, but I was thinking we might have to start seeing other people, you know. But I want to share with y'all some of the stats from Washington State. 40% of the workforce is currently in sectors that are at a high risk for on-the-job COVID infection. And Black folks, Black workers are highly overrepresented in these jobs at about 43%. These are the folks who took on and still take on serious COVID risks daily. And we're not talking about just first responders. We're not talking about healthcare workers or firefighters or EMTs. We're talking about line cooks. We're talking about childcare providers. We're talking about workers who are on the front line and who had been deemed essential but not treated accordingly. We played a lot of lip service to essential workers. Employers threw a lot of pizza parties, right? But what they didn't do until we started fighting for it was provide them with the necessary PPE so they could be safe at work. What they didn't do until we fought for it was make sure that they paid them hazard pay on the job. What they didn't do until we fought for it was give them presumptive L&I or workers' comp benefits if they got COVID on the job. Because see, corporations in the US during the pandemic made record profits. The 10 wealthiest people in the world doubled their income during the COVID pandemic. Shame, shame. While the rest of us, the 99% of us, things got worse. Oh, there's my slide. So we are seeing a rise in support for the labor movement in the States, a rapid increase in organizing across sectors that had never been organizing before. In the US, 60 million workers said they would join a union right now if they could. Union favorability is at 71%. Just to give you some context, that's higher than hot dogs. We love our hot dogs, yeah? Yeah. Union favorability is at the highest it's ever been. And this makes sense because at its core, the labor movement is a mass movement for change, powered by working people whose labor upholds our economy, puts food on the table, and provides the infrastructure and the services our society relies on. We exist to fight the forces that seek to enslave the human soul and to combat the unjust systems that privileged billionaires and corporate CEOs are fighting for to the detriment of working people, our families, and our communities. It's no wonder union favorability is so high with a pitch like that. I think if we went around and told folks we're fighting the forces that seek to enslave the human soul, we could sign cards tomorrow. We got to change our policies at the federal level so we can make that organizing a little bit easier. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the organizing that's happening in the states. In Alabama, for instance, where mine workers have been on strike for over 600 days. This is the longest strike in US history. And Amazon workers in Alabama, they've ran massive organizing campaigns against some of the biggest corporations in the world. And this organizing is happening in the Deep South, a notoriously anti-worker region, where workers are standing up and fighting back because they know that with the power of the union, they can change their circumstance. They're not alone. Healthcare workers who held it down for us during the height of the pandemic have taken action. They're picketing and striking for fair pay and more staff. Teachers across Washington and the US hit picket lines to secure needed investments in kids' education and fair compensation. The organizing wave has spread to tech, where software engineers and other tech workers at Alphabet have organized with the Communication Workers of America. Food service workers have led some of the loudest organizing drives in recent years, despite massive obstacles to organizing in this sector. And Starbucks. That's right. That's right. Starbucks, a company with a long history of union busting in BC and in the US, is seeing the biggest organizing drive to date, with thousands of workers organizing in stores all across the country. Rural stores, stores in the Deep South, stores in tech hubs. This organizing drive is spreading like wildfire, and it is being led by young workers and workers of color. Ooh. I feel like I want to hit this one. And despite all this organizing and all this energy, we have yet to realize the gains. We're at the cusp of something big and something meaningful. And we're still struggling because there is a concerted effort to keep working people in a scarcity mindset. There's fear and uncertainty, and they're hoping that they can keep us from uniting together and claiming what is ours. We've seen COVID disinformation weaponized to cast doubt on trusted institutions and community members alike in an attempt to preserve profit margins at the expense of working people. We've seen right-wing reactionaries elevate white supremacists, looking to sow division among working people. And we've seen billionaires and corporations flagrantly violate labor laws because they're confident that their wealth will protect them from consequences. Shame. They hope to wear us down. But we know the truth. We know that united, we vastly outnumber those who stand against us. We depend on one another for our collective liberation because we are all we've got. We are going to have to save the working class together because the rich folks aren't going to do it for us. So how do we preserve that unity? I want to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing at the State Labor Council around becoming an actively anti-racist organization. This is work that we have been doing since you can give it up for that. We don't do it because it feels good or because it's the right thing to do, even though both of those things are true. We do it because it's strategic. Because in the States, the working class will be majority minority in 9 short years. It's already 2023 for me, so I'm rounding up. So if we want to remain relevant for workers in the future, we have to do the difficult work of becoming an actively anti-racist organization now, today. And this is work that we've been doing. You can give it up for that. So I mentioned earlier that the constitutional compliance is one of my responsibilities as the Secretary-Treasurer, and that our Constitution charges us with fighting the forces that seek to enslave the human soul. That is both personal, because constitutional compliance, or professional, because of constitutional compliance, and personal, because my grandparents were sharecroppers in rural Louisiana, which means they, like the generations before them, picked cotton just to survive. And when my grandfather realized the landowner was shorting some of the families on the crop payout, he got the other farmers all riled up. You know, I like to think of him as a union organizer. Yeah. But as you can imagine, the landowner didn't like that much. So he sent some men to the house, and they dragged my grandfather out to the whipping post. They were intent on making an example out of him. My grandfather was a strong, proud man, and he fought back, and he was able to escape, but only because he used what he always referred to as his Texas Jack, which was this knife he kept tucked inside his right boot. But he knew if they found him, they'd lynch him for sure. So he and my grandmother and the 5 kids went into hiding, and they made their way to northern Louisiana, where my grandmother's family told him, you can stay, but you gotta learn to keep your head down and your mouth shut. So we don't want that kind of trouble around here. And he knew that he couldn't raise his family with any dignity in the violent and segregated South. And my grandfather dreamt of a better world and a better life, not just for him, but for his children and his children's children. So he left my grandmother and the family in the safekeeping of her family, and he migrated to Washington in search of social and economic justice. He made his way through the Hanford plant which was an entry point for a lot of Black families during the migration of that time. But I know that there's no border he wouldn't have crossed in order to secure a better life for his family and the generations behind him. There at the Hanford plant, he earned a fair day's pay for a hard day's work for the first time in his life. He was able to save enough money to send for the family. They eventually made their way to Seattle, and he lived a life of dignity with his head held high. So for me and my family and my community, the struggle for social justice and the struggle for economic justice are inextricably linked. They are the exact same struggle. One simply cannot exist without the other. And when we take that work as a labor movement and we work together to address the racism that's being used to divide workers in the workplace, we are powerful and stronger together. So I was going to hit you with some stats, but what I really want to talk about is this definition right here. At the State Labor Council, we define racism as a system of oppression that is designed to divide the working class so the wealthy elite can consolidate their wealth and their power at the top. It is the system that has been in place, it is the system that still exists, and it is our responsibilities as leaders in this movement to do what we can to interrupt this system and to build a new system, one that works for all workers. Because as long as we are divided, we are weak. And as long as race is a tool that's being used to divide the working class, we'll never build real meaningful power together. So we talk about this as a system. Y'all can give it up for that. We talk about this as a system because we know that it exists without our participation. It is a system that is at play, no matter how you engage in this system, and it's a system that harms all of us. No one wins under this system except the wealthy elite, those 10 rich guys I talked about earlier. And it's important that we do this and that we build the kind of labor movement that all workers want to be a part of, because that is the future of workers, both in the States and in Canada. And that is the work of leaders in this room. And so I know I am short on time, so I want to hit you. What I wanted to leave you with today, and one of the reasons that we need to do this work, is because none of us have the answers on our own, right? At the height of COVID, I was watching Wonder Woman with my family. I'm Team Marvel, but it was COVID, so what are you gonna do? And I'm watching Wonder Woman fly through the sky, and I remember thinking, if I could fly, would I do it with my hands up in the air, out to the side, or behind me like a dart? I spent most of the movie thinking through the advantages and disadvantages of these 3 ways to fly. So at the conclusion, I asked my family, if you could fly, how would you do it? With your hands up in the air like Superman, out to the side like an airplane, or behind you like a dart? And my youngest daughter, Naya, she's a scientist. She's A-type. She'll admit to that. She says, oh no, Mom, I would fly with one hand up, one hand bent, my knee bent, so I can be super aerodynamic through the sky, right? I want to be highly efficient. And I thought, ooh, I didn't even think about that you could fly with one hand bent and one hand up. So I asked my daughter, Jasmine, if you could fly, how would you fly? Up in the air like Superman, out to the side like an airplane, behind you like a dart. And she said, oh, Jasmine's my creative. It's her birthday. Happy birthday, Jazz. She's my creative, right? She's a spoken word artist. Hair's never the same color for longer than a week. And she said, oh no, Mom, if I could fly, I would fly like I was snowboarding. Like I want to rock heel to toe through the sky. And I want to land, real cool. I thought, I didn't even think that you could fly like you were snowboarding. So I asked my husband, Marcus, if you could fly, how would you do it? And Marcus is a total dad. All he wants to do is chill and watch sports. So he said, oh, no, I wouldn't fly like that. I would fly on my back, with my feet crossed at the ankles and my hands behind my head. I just want to chill. And I remember thinking, I didn't even think about that. I was thinking there were only 3 ways to fly, and had I not asked the question, I'd still be thinking, would I fly like this, or like this? So I became fascinated with the question, and I started asking people everywhere I went, if you could fly, how would you do it? Up in the air, see, I'm a little clumsy. Up in the air, out to the side, behind you like a dart. And one person told me, oh no, I would fly like a butterfly, low to the ground, and I'd go from flower to flower to flower. I thought, that sounds lovely. Naya would hate it. Not super efficient, but it sounds lovely. Someone else said I'd fly with a bumper pad in case I bumped into anything. I can totally relate. Someone else said I'd fly with wings. One person told me I'd fly in a flock with my friends. And then finally someone told me, oh, I wouldn't fly. I would teleport. And I was like, I didn't even think about teleportation. It's a beautiful thing when you invite the people around you to imagine with you, to create with you. No one ever says, that's impossible, I can't fly. Everyone is willing to imagine with you and to create with you. And when you invite the people around you to imagine with you, to bring their different ideas and their perspectives, their histories and their backgrounds, you not only come up with several ways to fly, but you realize that there are infinite ways to move. So sisters, siblings, brothers, I want to thank you for inviting me to your convention. I wish you the best convention, and I look forward to finding new ways to move in this movement with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Perfect. That's awesome. April, on behalf of our delegates, thank you for that just inspiring and amazing update on what you're up to and how you do business. You know, as I was an international rep with the IBW, as Liz talked about, for 18.5 years, and I dearly miss the connection with our American siblings on the work that they're doing and letting us know the things we have in common, that the borders truly don't matter when it comes to solidarity, is a true inspiration to all of us. Thank you for what you brought to us today. Here's a small token of our appreciation.